Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Jason Johnson, and he leads a 200 or at least over 200 person IT organization focused on making technology serve the business, not the other way around. And from packing boxes on the warehouse floor to building data-driven systems that directly impact revenue, efficiency, and customer loyalty, he brings a rare ground-level perspective to executive decision-making. And with a background in the U.S. Navy and the Department of Defense, and a relentless focus on uptime, outcomes, and clarity, he joins us to break down how technical leaders can better communicate with the business and drive real impact. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thanks for having me.
So from your vantage point as a CIO, what are the most common communication gaps you see between IT teams and business stakeholders?
I think one of the biggest gaps that I see is actually like a deep understanding of what problem we're trying to solve in whatever business unit or whatever team you're working with. Is actually the get on a whiteboard, drawing it out, and really centering yourself on the actual issue that you're really trying to solve, and kind of what's upstream of that and what's downstream of that. Um, picture's worth a thousand words there for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. So then, how does ineffective communication from technical teams impact executive decision making, particularly when you're balancing technology investments with broader business priorities?
Yeah, I think that what I see a lot is that it is either one of two things. It's either like sometimes technical teams kind of come in and they go a little fear driven decision making. We focus a lot on like, hey, if we don't do this, X, Y, and Z bad will happen, right? If we don't have backups, all of our data is going to be deleted. If we don't have battery backups, the world's going to end. Instead of focusing a little bit more on like how those systems enable us to look forward and serve our customers better. Kind of the what if, the art of what's possible. Certainly on core infrastructure systems and stuff like that, there's some non-negotiables that exist in IT in general. Um, but I'll give you a really good example. Like we talk about security teams, and I think what you really want your IT team not to turn into is the no team. And for people to think that, hey, everything we do, everything we bring to them is no, because frankly, in a world of AI enablement, I was just in a conversation with my team about some of this stuff. Like, the answer is like, if the user wants to do it, they're probably just going to figure out a way to do it without you, right? They're just going to go around you. And we could get into a long conversation about shadow IT and stuff like that, but where there's a will, there's a way. And so you have to embrace and kind of say, hey, we're here to work together. We're here to figure this out. What's the problem? How do we communicate that to people? What's the upside for the business? And do more, analogies or scenario-based planning to try to understand how you can drive the mission of the business and tying the goals that you have to the goals that the business has, and really making sure that you're serving those well. So, for instance, our security team is really not allowed to say no to things. We say, hey, security team, like your job isn't to say no. Your job is to present risks. Your job is to present rewards. Your job is to red flag things. Your job is to strategize with the business and say, here's how we could do this. I think a lot of times as IT people, we we tend to look into the future on something and say, well, there's no way we would ever do this if you really understood how difficult or how complicated it would be to do or how risky it would be to do. So I just kind of shorten that and go, nope, no, you can't have an unauthenticated FTP server. We're not doing that. Instead of kind of reframing that and going, we absolutely are technically capable of doing that, and we could do it. What are the risks of doing it, and what problem are we solving, and how do I help you come up with a solution that checks all those boxes and gets the ball moved across the line?
Yeah, that sounds way more collaborative than just saying no. When you were talking, Jason, it reminded me of back when I worked as an engineer. I worked in medical devices and I was a product development engineer. And the no people were quality and regulatory affairs. and
Yep.
none of us could stand. It wasn't as collaborative as we would have liked because we know in product development, we're working on things that we think are useful and cool and that the market will appreciate. And then we want to put it out there, but then the quality people slow it down and say, no, this drawing is wrong. You got to change this in the drawing, and you got to route this through all these people, and they got to sign off on this and that. It's like, oh man. And then next thing you know, the SOPs that we were using, they might have changed revs, so you used the wrong one. So you gotta
Yeah.
go back. I was like, man, I hate this.
Yeah, and look, I mean, look, like if you think about if I were to tell you that, hey, I was going to build an e-commerce company, right? And I was going to sell graphics cards, and we're going to have graphicscards.com, and I'm going to build the best graphics card company. And I told you, Neil, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to put up a web page, and to access my site, you have to submit a form. How much revenue do you think I'm going to make? How good people would, if I said, hey, I'm going to start a graphics card store and I'm going to lock the door and customers have to come knock on the door and I have to manually let them in and everybody go, we can't run a business like that. You have to be warm and inviting and care about the friction. We have all those same things in business processes. We have all those same things in development cycles and where are those friction points and how do we truly understand what the goal of each one of those steps in any process is. I'm a huge process guy, but what is the actual outcome of that step? And then how do I accelerate that and say, man, if you can come to a decision point, if you can solve the ask or the gate of this particular step in the process ahead of it, first off, we don't even have to do the step. You've proven that we've gotten to it and I can remove friction. Or you can get the right group of folks rallied around what the outcome is there. And having proper documentation on software development, having quality checks, those are valuable things, right? Those are love letters we're writing to ourselves in the future. But those conversations shouldn't start with no, you can't. It should start with how do I help you get there? Um,
Right.
and that's and that's I think it's a cultural driven aspect of technology.
You're a better person than me, Jason. I didn't see them as love letters at all. I mean, we used to write these, the protocols and reports and the various documentation and turn them into doc control. And sometimes they reject them because you didn't use the right revision. And then you got to go
Yeah,
and you do it again. It's just like, man, I ain't got better things to do. But uh,
I
but
got better things to do.
but hey, that's their job. They're doing their job, and I'm doing my job. I need to stop complaining. That's basically what it
Yeah.
comes down to, for sure. Okay, so then I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned risks. So, what are when the business leaders don't understand the risks properly on the work that you're doing? What kind of issues does that potentially bring up?
Yeah. So for me, when business leaders don't understand risk, first off, like as a human being, I internalize that deeply. Communication, doesn't just stop at me; it stops at the ear of the receiver. And so I think, man, if I go to Neil and I tell Neil that we need battery backups on our servers, and he says, no, I'm not spending money on that, man, I personally have just probably not done a good enough job communicating the importance of that. So I really put a lot of onus back on me to make sure as a leader, I'm doing a good job of laying that risk out and explaining it. And I've been in many conversations over my many years where you have to reiterate and continue to find, hey, what's the thread that's going to make this to click to someone? And maybe that's a spreadsheet that shows you the cost of downtime and what that impacts the business. Maybe that's a scenario. Maybe that's an analogy. But you really got to be willing to advocate. What I see a lot in technical teams is people come and say, well, I want battery backups for the servers because it's going to create an outage if we don't have them. And the business leader goes, that's expensive. We don't really want to spend that much money. And the IT person just becomes deflated and says, well, they said they wouldn't want to do it. Here we are. And so it is what it is. Instead of really evangelizing for that work. And sometimes that's a PowerPoint deck. Sometimes those are uncomfortable skills that you have to get out in front of and understand how to really effectively communicate the risk and the reward. And so, that might be something like, well, if we don't have this and we have a call center, are you okay with dropping every phone call that's in progress and hanging up on all of our customers? And the other piece of that is if the business says, or whatever entity says, yeah, we're okay with that risk, that you also have to be able to stomach that. Like there is an acceptable level of risk that happens, right? Look at the probability of a car crash, and yet all of us get in a car almost every day and drive someplace, right? I mean, life has acceptable risk, and You can't wear that as a win or a loss as a technical team, and try to keep score. That's a pattern I typically find a lot out there, when talking to groups is they start to keep score on the number of things that they won with the CFO or won with the CEO or won with the CIO versus trying to really understand, hey, what's my risk tolerance landscape? What's the decision making that we're doing? How do I actually record these decisions so that when it does blow up, there's not an I told you so moment, but there's a difference between coming to the table when that happens and going, you know, Neil, I told you, I told you so. I told you we were going to hang up on our customers versus coming and going, no, this was a risk that we saw. This was a risk that we accepted, and this is where we are.
Yeah, you certainly don't want the finger pointing afterwards, and I think you're right about that, Jason. As with technical people, they could ring the alarm on a potential issue, and perhaps the business person says that's not something we're going to deal with right now, and they just leave it there, and they're possibly thinking, well, I mean, I tried, and if things hit the fan, well, we could always point to the business person because the business person said this isn't happening, so it's not going to be my fault. But I mean, how often is it the case that maybe things do hit the fan and you get as a technical person you get pointed at anyway? It's like, hey, you
Yep.
should have. Why didn't you tell us? It's like I did tell you. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've put a couple programs in place, but one of them we love is called redundancy at work. And so, here at Sweetwater, we have four separate internet connections coming in from various locations around the building. We use BGP to share those interconnections and flow back and forth. So, if you're an end user at Sweetwater, you haven't experienced an internet outage in years. But yet, we know those providers are failing, not on a regular basis, but they tend to go down here and there. A lot of that work in IT, I don't think gets shared up to the executive team as naturally as it could. And so we like to call that redundancy at work. Hey, there are times when we solved problems architecturally, physically, triaging that the company never experienced, the customer never experienced. And you gotta tout those wins in a way that people understand that they're investing in something that's actually paying off for them. If I asked you for $50,000 and I put it in my pocket and walked away forever, and I came back and asked you for $50,000 2 years later, you're probably going to look through that through a lens, right? Of what happened to my money. But if I give you $50,000 and I told you about how it grew and how it and I send you pictures of it, think of these things as kids, as babies, right? Here's what this money's doing. Here's what we did with it. Here's the positivity that it created. Here's the events that it saved us from. Here's how it protected the customer. And really take the time to slow down and communicate that in a way that works. Um, that's the unlock that when the next time somebody comes in and says, "Here's my 50 grand," you get a large, loud yes, let's go do that. It's building trust. You have to productize your IT shop as a service back to the business in a large way, I think these days, especially when it used to be that IT was a commodity or not a commodity. It was exclusive, and I could only work with the people in my business to do the things that I want to do. And again, more and more, we are becoming a commodity. The services we provide can be provided by others.
Yeah, and I guess knowing that we got to change our behaviors, accordingly. If I had $50,000 to give people, I know I'm doing pretty well in life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
100%. Okay, so let's just say you are, a technical person, and you have to communicate something that's complex technically to non-technical people, business people. How do you determine what level of technical detail to include in such communication?
I think keep it simple is what I always say. Be ready to answer the deep questions, depending on your organization, depending on who you're talking with, right? You have to match the level of communication to your receiver. And I like to start high level. I don't make assumptions around the processes that surround those things. So why are we doing it? Just coming in and saying we have, servers and the servers need backups or the servers need this or whatever else. Like, do you even understand what a server is? Do you understand the importance of those servers? So how do we back up and kind of tell a story? Um, and I really think, pictures worth 1,000 words, drawings, diagrams, stuff like that, and then being able to double click on any one of them and really speak to it. I typically like to let the receiver of my message drive how deep I'm going to go technically on anything.
Yeah.
So I use my wife a lot. A lot of times I'll sit down and explain stuff to my wife. I'll show a PowerPoint presentation to someone who's a non-technical person and go, "Do you understand this?" And I think generally speaking, from a communication standpoint, if you're trying to explain something to a non-technical user, you know, they need to be able to get it pretty quickly. I would say maybe even 60 seconds or 2 minutes within the first 2 minutes of a conversation. You need to understand what ballpark we're in, what we're talking about. And if not, I've probably failed and I've probably lost your attention to some degree. Or you've already written off in your head, man, I have no idea what this guy's talking about, and you know, I'm not going to be helpful.
Yeah, and I know that I've certainly been in that situation where you've been in a presentation and someone's talking and perhaps you don't know what they're talking about, and then you start thinking about other things like where are you going for lunch?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and you don't want to be that person. I think it's really smart that you have your wife to present to and to get her and get her understanding. And I think a great something even to add to that is asking her what did you understand from what I just
yeah,
said? To see
yeah.
if what you intended to say is what she took in.
Or even just a basic question. And my wife is non-technical. I mean, she's a very bright person, but she's non-technical. But if I can explain it to someone who has little to no context, not just about the subject, but about the entire ecosphere that the question exists in, right? And she can pick it up pretty quickly, then explaining to someone with a little bit of context is gonna go much smoother. And so, I think that you just have to kind of target those areas and figure out what it is exactly you want to do. So the question I love to ask is like, what do you think I actually want here? Can you jump to what I actually want? Am I asking for money? Am I asking for approval? Am I asking for a tool? Am I asking like, and if somebody can look at something within, 60 seconds and go, "Oh, I'm pretty sure what you're asking for is X, and that is accurate." Okay, well then really the next question is like, okay, what supporting evidence do you need or what information do you need to be able to make that decision? Um, if you read a root cause analysis or you read some of these really, really long emails that people get very, very, very technical on, and you sit down and you go, I don't actually even know what they're trying to communicate to me. And that is the thing that I try to tell people that you know better than anybody else. Like that is a skill, and that is a skill that you have to work on. You have to think of that skill like developing, like knowing the next Microsoft product, right? That is an actual skill that takes work that does not come naturally to most people in general, but is a skill that needs to be mastered.
I fully agree with you, Jason. And I think a lot of us technical people, we forget that we weren't always technical. You know, that root
Yeah,
cause analysis that you
yeah,
just talked about and sending it to people. Yeah, of course you understand it now. You better. I mean, you sent it, so
yeah,
hopefully you understood what you sent. But you have to recognize that you weren't always that expert that would have understood what all these words mean. And the people that you're sending these emails to and that you're communicating with, they are likely how you were before you were that technical person. So you need to harken back to that guy or that woman.
yeah.
What could you have understood back then? And really put your communication in a way that satisfies that person as opposed to who you currently are.
Yeah. And that's when I do mentoring or coaching with IT professionals, usually what separates good IT leadership or strong IT leadership away from, you know, okay IT leadership is a deep understanding of the business. Do you understand your revenue flow? Do you understand how you make money? Do you understand what knobs in your business really are causing it? Do you understand how the money flows? Do you understand where it comes from? Do you understand what your marketing propositions are? Do you truly understand the business? And then additionally, do you truly understand the technology that supports that? And when you can start to use the language of your team, and interweave the technical components into it, you really start to get an unlock because that's how everybody else is thinking. They're not sitting there and going, I got to keep the app alive. I got to keep the app alive. If the app's not alive, I'm not doing my job. I got to keep the server running. They're sitting there and going, I have to serve my customers, and I use this app as a tool.
Yeah.
And I know those are like short reframings, but if you can center around the language that the group you're communicating with naturally uses, I think you will find that those conversations become much more natural because you can tie out those wins and rough edges. So I think, blameless postmortems are a great way that we do that. Whenever anything happens or goes wrong, we do a blameless postmortem, and we invite the team members that impacted in, and we say, how did this actually impact the customer? How did this impact your team? What was it like when that server was down for an hour? What did you do? How did that work? And then, not in a nefarious way, but I can go, oh, now I understand a little bit more about the customer service team, and I can understand how painful that is. And I can actually reuse that in forward communication to go, we need to make this investment here because remember when we had this hour outage and this happened and that happened and the next thing happened? You know, those things weren't good. And you told me that.
That's really smart that you go about it that way, Jason. It's framing things in a way that people can understand and can appreciate. I think as technical people, we just assume that the way that we look at it is the way that other people look at it, but that's just not the case. And if you frame it in a way that's important to them, well, now it becomes more important to them, and it becomes more
Yeah,
understandable to them, and it becomes more actionable to them. It becomes more effective, your communication generally, as opposed to, well, here's the root cause analysis report. Understand it because I
yep,
understand it. Good luck with
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, this is, I'm curious, Jason. I mean, you offer some great insights so far. So I'm curious, when it comes to you as a technical person communicating with non-technical people, is this something you've always been good at? And if not, what did you do to get better at it?
Yeah, I think I've always kind of had a knack for it. I'm a big analogy guy. We have my right hand guy has a OneNote running over multiple years of all my little sayings and analogies. That's just like how I've personally always correlated life is thinking through kind of analogies. But I have absolutely worked on it, and I've taken classes on communicating executive communication through PowerPoint, executive communication through writing, you know, asking for feedback from people around you and saying how you know does this make sense? How could I have communicated that better? What made it click? And thinking about yourself like you're a piece of software that you're constantly iterating on and working on and improving. What are those feedback loops that you need to make yourself better, instead of just getting frustrated or upset because you're just not getting what you want. And
Yeah.
I think that's totally natural. Like I think it's totally natural to be frustrated. And honestly, a lot of times it's not that you're not getting what you want, it's that you understand something that other people don't understand, and you're more frustrated that if you just understood this, you know, you would make the same decision as me. And a lot of times I think that that's actually true. I think that it really is just a lack of understanding that becomes the challenge.
So interesting when you mentioned that, Jason. I mean, how many instances have we been in a situation where someone is communicating with us and we don't understand? We don't think to ourselves, well, they should put it in a way that we understand.
Yep.
We're thinking, well, they're messing up. But when we communicate, we're not thinking we're messing up. It's them. They're
Yeah.
the problem. We're pointing
Yeah.
the finger.
Yeah. Well, what's that old saying? We judge ourselves based off of our intent, and we judge others based off of actions, right? I only know the words that come out of your mouth. That's the only way I know how to judge you. But I judge myself based off of, all the thoughts that are floating around my brain at a million miles an hour and where I want to go.
Yeah. And
And
and everyone else should know. I mean, you should know my intent. I mean,
yeah, that's
I know
right.
my intent. Why do you not know? Yeah, human beings. We're
Yeah.
something, aren't we?
We're the most fascinating computers to ever exist.
100%.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this also, Jason. What can an organization do to help their technical people become better at communicating with non-technical people?
I think that it's the same things we've been talking about, but in the reverse, right? Leaderships above IT teams, they really need to get in the weeds with the technical teams and understand the problems that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. Just like I say, hey, I go pack boxes in the warehouse, or I go sit with teams in marketing and understand workflows. There needs to be a lot more understanding of the challenges that we face as a group. The pressures around privacy laws, the pressures around legal implications, the pressures around uptime. These are very real things that IT teams faced, and a lot of times there's a little bit of a vibe back from the business, like, oh, well, that's just your job, right? You just need to deal with that, and um, that doesn't create an environment where there's a good shared understanding of what's important and what's not important. And so I think asking a lot more questions and more deeply understanding. And let me give you a good example. When something's broken, when something's dramatically broken in your business, the internet's down, a server's down that's got the CRM system on it, you name it, right? Um, Usually the business jumps in and starts having a lot of really great questions, right?
Yeah,
And sometimes that's under a level of stress that makes that not feel good. But how do you have those same questions every day? How do you understand the importance of these tools? I think a lot of times it's kind of like a utility to some extent. Some of these things are, and people just assume they're always going to work and assume they're always there and assume everything's good and that they don't need to really understand it. But then all of a sudden they have to come up to speed. And that's where I think a lot of the friction and frustration comes in is like, now I need you to come up to speed under pressure in a moment. We really need to be in the same, we really need to have that shared language established prior for sure.
absolutely. This has been a great conversation, Jason. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can hit me up on LinkedIn or any other message or way that you could find me. I'm a pretty accessible guy. I love to respond to people.
Excellent. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Neil. This was great.